Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
I often like to think about content as being like rocks in a river. If you imagine your potential customers on one side of the river and the sale is on the other side of the river, each piece of content is a rock that you're putting in to help them get from one side to the other. But if you're just throwing them in at random, it's going to be really hard for somebody to make the crossing. If they're too small or if there's not enough of them, they're too far apart, it makes it really tricky. So if you're putting the rocks in the river with thought, like, okay, they need to know this, then they need to know this, then they need to know this, then they can make a sale. It's so much easier, right? You're not losing people getting washed down the river.
Welcome back. I hope your week's been awesome so far. My recent conversations with executive coach and author Michael Dietrich Chastain and feng shui expert Patricia Lohan were awesome. So if you haven't listened to them yet, go check them out, but only after you've listened to today's conversation. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Lacy Boggs of the Content Direction Agency. She's author of the Kindle ebook, Make a Killing with Your Content. Her vision is to replace the noise in the online marketing space with thoughtful, valuable, and essential content. She helps visionaries, thought leaders, and CEOs change the world through excellent content. In our conversation today, Lacy talked to me about writing content to attract your dream customer. We talked about the key questions for each piece of content, and we talked about how to use reviews to inform your customer research. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Lacy Boggs. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from Denver, Colorado in the USA, Lacy Boggs, who's a content strategist. She's the author of the best-selling Kindle ebook, Make a Killing with Content, and she's the director of the Content Direction Agency. She helps small business owners fill their program or practice with content marketing. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Lacy. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Natasha Vorompiova, who was our guest on episode 311 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have a conversation with you. So big hello to Natasha.
Thank you so much, Natasha.
Now, you've got a journalism background and PR and film background, and now you're focused very much more tightly, I guess, on producing content for businesses. So tell us how that came about.
Oh, it has been a long and winding road, that's for sure. I do have a film degree.
Song.
Yeah, right. Don't tempt me. I could break into song at any moment. No, I do have a film degree. That's what I went to college for. I thought I would be the next Sofia Coppola or something, but Hollywood and I did not get along the way I thought it would. And so I ended up temping for a few years, having a quarter life crisis, and then getting into PR, as you mentioned. And then from there, I got into journalism when we moved to Colorado, and travel writing and food writing, which was a lot of fun. Nice work if you can get it, to be paid to eat and travel.
Travel, yeah.
And then I got pregnant, and I was working for a very small hyperlocal magazine here in Colorado at the time. And I was putting in 60+ hour weeks and staying at the office until, 3 o'clock in the morning on deadline. And I thought, I don't know how I can do this with a baby.
Mm.
And so I struck out on my own, tried to freelance for a while. And I also started a food blog because I was a food writer. And the food blog did really well for certain metrics, right? I was attracting a lot of readers. I got picked up by one of Martha Stewart's websites. And I think I made about $500 that year from the blog because I didn't really understand how the business model of blogging worked. And so at the end of that year, my husband took me aside and said, I love that you're staying home with our daughter. I love that you're trying to work from home. And I need you to make just a little more money. And I said, no problem. I have a new idea. Because I figured I'm pretty good at this blogging thing. Maybe other people would pay me to blog for them. And it turned out that they would. And so that's where that started. And we're 8 years in now. So apparently that was a pretty good idea.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I like the transition there. And one of the things that I often hear from people is we don't know how to blog, or we don't have anything to say, or we don't really think that's important. So what do you say to people that have those beliefs?
If I had a nickel for every time I heard those kinds of things, I wouldn't have to work. No, I think the idea that they don't know what to write or they don't know how to blog, that's very common. Most people did not start their business to be a blogger. They did not start their business even to be a marketer necessarily. So it's very common and normal for a business owner to say, I don't know what to write about, or I don't know how to make this work. The idea that blogging doesn't work is actually, I think, false. I think it has changed a lot over the years. Internet years are like dog years. It's like, things change so quickly, but blogging still works very well, and long form content works very well to nurture people, to move them along your customer funnel. It's just a matter of, we don't want to be putting out just garbage. We don't want to just be adding to the noise. You have to actually be useful and putting out content that people want to read, that will help your business grow. And so I think that's kind of the difference. And helping people figure out what that is for their business is what I like to do. So it's not uncommon to not know what to blog about, but it's a solvable problem.
Hmm. Yeah, well, you mentioned a couple of things there that I'd like to dig into deeper. One of them is noise and the importance of standing out from the noise. The other one is like the strategy, and you have to know how to go about putting out content. And I'm guessing your philosophy, but based on what I've read, is put out less but quality rather than more. And yet consistency is something that's really important as well. So let's tackle the noise first, because there is so much information now on the internet. It's that dog years, one year is like 7 years,
Right.
and it seems to explode. And so how do you, as a blogger, as a business that's trying to get a message out to your ideal clients or your ideal audience, how do you stand out from that noise?
I think the first thing is to ensure you're producing quality content. So a lot of times people will ask me, how often should I be blogging? How much should I be putting out there? And my answer is always as much as you can produce quality, right? So if that means you can only produce one quality blog post a month because you need to put resources and time and energy into it, then do that. Don't try to be publishing just for the sake of publishing every week, right? Because I would rather have a client publishing once a month and have their clientele, their audience just looking forward to it, checking their inbox, checking their Twitter feed. Did they publish yet? Rather than them being like, whatever, they published again, scroll, I don't care. So quality over quantity is absolutely my philosophy. But, figuring out what that is going to be, we want to be useful, right? We want to be useful to the reader, but then we also want to be useful to the business. I often talk about those as sort of the two big whys behind blogging and content marketing. You have to understand, why am I doing this for the reader? Why do they care?
Mm.
And also, why am I doing this for my business? How is this going to help me? How is this going to move me forward? And when you can answer those two questions with a single piece of content, you've got a winner.
Yeah. I like that you kind of focus on the two things at one time. How's this work for the business? Why is it good for the business? And why is it important for the reader?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get somebody's attention to start with? Because you talked about community or ideal customers. Well, how do you get their attention to start with so that they see, hey, Lacy writes some really good quality content. I can't wait for her next piece after I've read these ones. But how do you get them to that point where they first discover you?
It's tricky, right? Because there is so much noise. So in general, I say that the way to get attention is to borrow someone else's stage. And so, if we buy an ad on Facebook, we're borrowing their stage. We're paying for the privilege, but we're borrowing their stage. But you can also do that organically. Coming on your podcast, I'm borrowing your stage for a few minutes to talk to your listeners. And hopefully they like what I have to say and come check me out. So that's another way. But you can do lots of different things where you get on somebody else's platform, and then they're lending you an element of credibility, right? They're lending you a bit of that know, like, and trust factor with their audience, which helps close the gap. And so then if you show up and you deliver and you give great content in whatever format that might be, then you've got their attention. Then you say, oh, that's a person I want to listen to. I'm willing to click the link or go to their website or read the book or whatever it might be to get more information. But really it's about finding those stages and figuring out how can you borrow somebody else's audience, whether you pay for it or do it organically.
That's brilliant. I've never heard anyone express it in such a clear and succinct manner. And, we do a lot of work with people to help them get on podcasts as guests.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a number of things there that you mentioned that I think are really critical, and I'm always surprised that there are so few people really focused on this. And that's not just getting on somebody else's stage, but then get there and be your best, deliver great value. Deliver great value. And that, it always astounds me that, or particularly in this area where we work in putting people as guests on podcasts, that there's lots of people out there offering that service, but they're doing here's how you get people's attention. Here's how you write a pitch to convince them that you should be on the show. Here's how to book appointments. Here's how to manage the system. So it's all very transactional and tactical, but nobody teaches you the bits and pieces around get prepared to show up as your best, understand who the audience is that you'll be talking to, and bring your content so that it actually speaks to that audience rather than somebody else who, you haven't thought about what the audience is that you're going in front. Things like that.
Got to bring your A game. If I want somebody to listen to this and think, wow, Lacy's somebody worth following or listening to, I got to bring my A game, right?
Exactly. All right. Now, you talked a lot about why you're doing content. So what are some of the questions that you would suggest people think about in terms of defining, is this a piece of content I should be putting out, or what's the next piece of content? What are the things I can be writing about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of times, especially people who aren't, the blogging or the marketing piece of it is not necessarily their zone of genius. They think about what is one of the two whys. They either think about what's going to promote my business, and then you get blog posts that are just me, buy, whatever.
Yeah.
Or they think solely about what's going to get people to like me. And that can be equally as detrimental, because even if people like you, you might be providing the wrong type of content or attracting the wrong audience. So I had a client for whom this was the case. They offered a done for you service but they were writing all these how-to articles. So they were basically telling their audience how to do the thing that they did.
Yeah.
They had a huge following, grew a big list, but the list
Mm.
didn't want to buy anything because they were
Yeah.
giving them all the secret sauce, right? And
So they were
it's
speaking to
totally
the people that were
understandable,
they were
right?
speaking to the people that wanted to do it themselves rather than those that wanted somebody to do it for them.
Exactly. But it's
Mm.
understandable even from the blogger's perspective because that's what they know how to do, right?
Mm.
They a lot of people have heard somebody say, write what you know, which is great until you're telling other people how to do it, right? So you kind of have to think about what is the type of content that's actually going to attract my ideal customer, not just
Mm.
any old traffic. We were having a conversation about this in a mastermind group earlier today, that the idea that not all traffic is created equal, right? You could go viral for something, but if it's not attracting customers, it's not really very useful to your business. So there's an idea there. You have to kind of ask yourself, is this going to attract my ideal customer? And then the second part of that is it going to move them closer to a sale? Right? Because you could write a great piece that would attract your ideal customer, but then they don't take any action. And that's not really doing your business any good either. So I often like to think about content as being like rocks in a river. If you imagine your potential customers on one side of the river and the sale is on the other side of the river, each piece of content is a rock that you're putting in to help them get from one side to the other. But if you're just throwing them in at random, it's going to be really hard for somebody to make the crossing. If they're too small or if there's not enough of them, they're too far apart, it makes it really tricky. So if you're putting the rocks in the river with thought, like, okay, they need to know this, then they need to know this, then they need to know this, then they can make a sale. It's so much easier, right? You're not losing people getting
Mm.
washed down the river.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that rocks analogy. In fact, I used that
Do you?
recently. It just came to me out of the blue, and I used it because there's another aspect of that when you use that metaphor, and that's that I like to say that traffic is actually people. They're
Mhm.
people that want to come into your world, and they come into your world, and there's a customer journey or a journey that they take until they become a customer, or maybe not, and the rocks analogy to me is not everybody comes into the journey at the start point of that step where they know nothing about what you have to
Very
offer.
true.
Some of
Mhm.
them come in and they're perhaps even experts in or they really understand the value of what you offer and they know a lot about it, but they're to come back to what we were talking about earlier, they're the people that I don't have time to do this. It's not my zone of genius. I want somebody who's an expert to do it for me, but I understand what needs to be done. So those people, you shouldn't be feeding them the information. Here's why you need to do this because they
Mhm.
already understand. So they're coming into the rocks halfway across the river, right?
Right. They've got waiters or something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's very true. I often see people, their content is focused on a single stage of the customer journey. So they're only speaking to that unaware reader. Or at the other end, they're only speaking to the very aware reader and not bringing people in at an earlier stage. So making sure your rocks are spread out, that you're speaking to lots of different stages is important as well.
Hmm. So how do you go about defining that in terms of the customer journey and how you speak to people that are at different stages of that journey? Because one of the things that I see a lot and a danger or a risk and a mistake that people often make in their marketing is if you think about, there's customers who are in a certain situation and it's an undesirable situation and they want to resolve that. And so after state is having that situation resolved. And that's where you, as the person that's already resolved that for yourself, are. And so a lot of people talk to that after state and they're talking to people who are already there because they're the ones that are like themselves, rather than going back and saying, well, before I discovered all this, what was I thinking? What was going through my mind? What was I looking for? What was I reading?
Hmm. That's great. That's a really good point because if you are focused at that end stage, you're missing a whole bunch of people. A lot of times, our clients aren't really thinking like, what are people Googling when they first are thinking about this problem? And it might not be the exact thing. They might not even know that your service or your product exists, right? They might not even know. This is especially true with coaches. I find that a lot of times with coaches, they're talking in coach speak. They're like, we got to actualize and we got to systematize and we got to do, but that's not what people are Googling, right? That's not what
Mm.
people are waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about. So if you can take half a step back and say, well, what are they thinking about in the morning when they wake up in cold sweat? That's where you can start. That's where you can grab people earlier in that journey. And we have to that's also where you can educate, right? Because if they think they have problem A, but you actually know they have problem B, you can educate them with content and bring them around to your way of thinking. And that can be very useful. I also like to say though that depending on where you are in your business, might also dictate where your content is addressing. So for example, if you're rather new in your business, you can really speak to that problem aware person more directly, because those are the people you want to convert right away. Those are the people that are already following you, already know what you do. And then as your business grows and gets a little more sophisticated, your content can expand out to attract people further away from that awareness, right? So you can start talking to the less aware people as you go. But it's not always a great idea to talk about to the completely unaware person when you're just trying to get started, because you just need those first few clients or customers at the beginning to prove your product or your service has legs, and then you can expand.
Yeah, I love that. And the idea of digging into what really worries your ideal clients and what keeps them up at night. How do you suggest we go about that? And how do you suggest we kind of dig deeper? Because what the common problem again I see here is, so I've got services around marketing and services around podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
So I look around and say, well, these are my dream clients. Now I've done a lot of work and to find that, but the risk is that I'm coming into that with, here's all the things that I can do. And so I'm trying to match that up with problems that I see, and it's always going to be clouded with where I'm coming from. So how do you kind of get at the real problems? Because I think that really gives opportunities to actually do something different as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you my super secret trick that I like to do. So obviously, if you have a budget for customer research, if you can go out and interview people, that's amazing. We have a gal on our team that can conduct customer research for those purposes. But of course, that takes money. So depending on where you're at in your business, one of my favorite tricks is to go on Amazon and look up books that are in your niche that are trying to solve a similar problem, and then read the bad reviews. This sounds a little like Schadenfreude or something, but what it really shows you is where the gaps are. So if there's books out there that are trying to address the same kind of problem you're addressing, the bad reviews will show you where they miss the mark, where there's a gap, where they're not answering the question people have. And so that's actually a really interesting way to kind of research, what is my industry not talking about? What are they not addressing? Where are the gaps? And then you can come in and fill that. If you can find those gold nuggets that say, I really like this book, but I wish it had talked more about X. And then you go write some content. Doesn't have to be a book, could be anything on X. You're actually filling a need. You're filling a gap that your competitors or other people in your niche are not filling. So it's kind of odd, but it's a sneaky little way to see what people are thinking about when they're thinking about these problems.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really brilliant. What I often use that for is to understand the language that people are using in that area, because if they've said something in the review and they've said, well, I wish they'd talked more about X and here's why that's a real issue for me. And then not only do you see where they've missed the mark, but you get the language that people are using. So you mentioned earlier about coaches, and a lot of businesses do this. They talk in their own jargon, and here
Super
you have an
easy to do.
yeah, that's right. So here you have an opportunity. This is what people say, and particularly if there's a bunch of bad reviews, even the good reviews, that talk about specific things, you can get some information on the language. But certainly if you're looking at the bad reviews to understand where are the gaps, and pick up the language.
Yeah. I find SEO research can also be useful for this because now don't get me to lying, because I'm not an SEO expert, but we have a gal on our team. And so sometimes we'll say, this client has sort of a really high level or very thoughtful philosophical problem that they solve. What are people actually searching for when they're looking to solve this problem? And it's usually very enlightening when we find this sort of thing out. We have a client right now that's all about sort of the philosophy of education and learning, and they try to teach educators a different way to approach it. But nobody's Googling for that, right? They're not searching for those things. They're searching for what assessment should I be giving my sixth graders, or how I need a better way to teach reading to fourth grader. Those are the kinds of things, very specific problems. But then we can take that very specific problem and turn it into a blog post that educates them, that closes that gap. So if they're looking for what's the best way to test my sixth graders on this, we could say, here's why these assessments for your sixth graders don't work, and let us show you a better way.
Yeah, and that brings up one of my favorite pet beefs about SEO, and it's this fallacy of we can guarantee you a number one position on SEO. Now it seems to be slightly waning. I haven't seen as much of that stuff recently, but I still get I probably about 3 or 4 emails every day,
right,
saying, "Oh, we love your website, but it's not ranking number one on Google." And I always laugh, because each time my immediate reaction is, well, what did you search for? I mean,
right.
ranking number one for what? And why would I want to rank number one for something that is not related to my particular work or industry? So
Exactly.
going back to what are people actually searching for is probably the first really key thing there.
Yeah. And I think it's important to know too that, when somebody is searching for something, but that's not the real problem, there's still an opportunity there to use that keyword and educate, right? So you can, and we usually shoot for longer tail keywords. We're not trying to land the front page for, weight loss or business planning or anything like that. But it's important to keep Google in mind. We say in my business, we write for humans first and Google second, but it is important to keep Google in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that strategy is really important, because you want people to find you, and
that's right.
And Google. I mean, the thing that always surprises me about this philosophy of how can we trick Google into ranking this content number one above everybody else, even though it might not necessarily be the best content for that particular audience, or it might not be actually the best quality there is out there. That shortcut thinking and philosophy, I mean, people don't understand that Google actually wants to deliver a good result to number one. It's not a game where, they're trying to stop you and you've got to figure out how can you beat them. It's, read their guidelines, give them what they want, because they want people to use Google as a search engine for the reason that every time I search on Google, I find exactly what I asked for.
That's right. Love at first search. That's what our SEO expert that we use, she talks about love at first search. We went.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I'll have to remember that. All right. So you use the term leadership marketing quite a bit in your work. What do you mean by that?
So the idea of leadership marketing came about when I got on a soapbox about the idea that, there were all these people out there that I would see that were definitely a leader in their industry. They were a leader in their niche. They were a thought leader. They were churning out innovative content and ideas, but they were following a template or a cookie cutter strategy in their marketing. And I'm like, why?
Mm.
If you're a leader with your in your industry and your business, there's no reason you can't also be a leader with your marketing. There's no reason that you can't take the good pieces, what works from different blueprints and formulas and so on, but then innovate, put your own spin on it, and be a leader with how you're showing up. And in my experience, you get much better results when you don't try to fit your square peg into a round hole just because somebody's selling the blueprint for $5,000.
Mm.
Uh, this is not to throw shade at any of those businesses that are selling blueprints. They're popular for a reason, right? They worked for a certain number of people, but every business is different. And so you can't expect that every blueprint formula, whatever out there, is going to work the same way for your business that it did for somebody else's. So to me, leadership marketing is looking at your clients, what they want. So it's back to that big why. What are we doing for them? Your brand and voice, and what do you want to produce? Because let me just tell you, if you're not having fun or at least, tolerating the kind of content you're putting out, people are going to know.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the third piece is, what is the data saying? What do we, when we try something, what do the metrics say? Is it working? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? And when you combine those three things for each individual business, you get a leadership marketing plan that's a little bit different for everybody. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to rewrite, what am I trying to say? We don't have to recreate the wheel here in order to create something new. We can pick and choose the best pieces, but then it's yours and it's unique to your business because that's what it needs to be. We did this for a launch at the end of 2019 for one of our clients. They wanted to do a pretty typical like challenge into a webinar, and the webinar would have a pitch and selling. And when we were brainstorming with this client, she was like, I think the challenge, we should have like 45-minute to an hour-long trainings every day and all this stuff. And I go, hold up. Your ideal customer is a time-starved business owner. They don't have 45 minutes a day for 5 days in a row to tune in. And the whole point is they don't have any time. So instead, we came up with an idea of like 5-minute challenge. And we actually did it so that each video was 5 minutes long. And for the whole week, their homework or whatever you want to say could fit on the size of a Post-it note. So we actually called it the Post-it note challenge. And the hook was like, if you give us 5 minutes a day and one Post-it note, we can tell you where the bottleneck is in your business. And it worked like gangbusters. She had a huge number of people come into her webinar. The webinar converted at something like 26%. It was their most profitable launch ever. So it wasn't that the idea of a challenge into a webinar launch was wrong. It was like, we can take those pieces, but we need to adjust them. We can't just have, okay, it has to be 45 minutes every day.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. We have to make it fit your clients and your business. And it did really well.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example, and it highlights, adapting to your dream client situation and understanding, because there might. So we're addressing a particular need with the service we're offering, but there's other issues there, and time definitely is an issue that people often ignore. I mean, they think about pricing because money can be an issue. I think about that. Where am I going to price that? That's always front of mind early on in these things. But the time investment is something that people just forget about. And I know, in this time when we're not traveling as much and everything's gone online, all of a sudden, particularly early on when the pandemic first started, March, April, I was getting like 30 or 40 emails a day. Come on this webinar, come on this, we're doing a 1 week challenge and so on. I thought, do people not understand that just because there's a pandemic and I can't travel as much? Yes, I've got a little bit of extra time, but it's not all of a sudden that
run.
yeah. And I thought, well, I wonder what they're thinking with all this marketing. In fact, I was thinking at the time I should get more visible online and do perhaps a challenge or do a webinar. And I was put off completely by just that experience, because I thought, well, I'm just adding to that noise and adding to the barrage that probably everybody is getting.
Right, right. For you, it might make more sense to do a pop-up podcast on a particular topic, or, little short podcast episodes or something like that, where it's a little different angle, but building on what you've already built here with your podcast. It's all about, what is your brand looking for, what is your ideal customer want, and then what is the data telling us? And I often look at, are you familiar? You probably are. The book Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yeah.
I often think about that in terms of where is the marketing gap? What is everybody else doing? If they're zigging, how can I zag? How can I do the opposite? Because that'll get you noticed, and that'll get, if everybody's doing long form blog posts, which they're not right now. But okay, here's a better example. Everybody's tweeting, I'm going to do long form content because that's going to set me apart, right? That's the kind of way I like to think. How do we set ourselves apart in a way that's going to work for our brand and our clients as well?
Well, we haven't touched on video yet, because you talked about, how can I stand out? I guess there's a large number of people saying right now video is the future and you should be doing video and so on. So as a former film producer, what are your thoughts on that?
It's so fascinating to me how my very weird background has all sort of come together in this job that I do now. But, video is great. I love video. I like to be on video. And I'm also still a big proponent of doing it with the written word, because at least right now, we talked about SEO a little earlier. Google is not doing a great job of crawling audio or video for SEO, right? They have started trying to do that, but what they're doing is basically an AI generated transcript and then looking at that for keywords. And if you've ever done an AI generated transcript, you know how terrible they can be. And also, when we're just talking like this, we're not optimizing anything for a keyword, right? We're not thinking about, what do I want people to search for? So while I think, yes, video is a great way to get attention on certain channels, I think it's also often really worth it to have an article, or I don't love transcripts because, again, they're not optimized, but to take a transcript and turn it into a blog post or an article or an email that you can then use in a text format as well, because then you're getting the best of both worlds. There's also an accessibility issue with audio and video. Not everybody chooses to or can listen to or watch, those types of media. So if you have the text option as well, then your bases are covered. You can be accessible as well as, pleasing the Google gods and getting your great content out there in lots of different forms.
Yeah. That's great advice. And I mean, one of the things that frustrates me a lot with video is doing that transcription. I know it's important on YouTube to have the what do they call it? The captions, closed captions for searching, but then to use their closed captioning service, apart from the fact that it takes a while, is the AI is pretty ordinary.
Not quite there yet. Yeah.
It seems to be a lot worse for an Aussie accent than for if you've got a New York accent. Seems to work the best. If I have transcribed some of my podcast things through AI, and I've come to the conclusion that the New York accents seem to do the best. So I think
that's so funny.
AI is geared towards that particular sound.
It wouldn't surprise me. And I'm sure you probably have this problem too. It always spells my name wrong. And then you look kind of like silly with your name spelled wrong.
That's right,
those captions.
Yeah. Well, I read some of it and I think, what the hell did I say there? But it was my introduction. I'd said my name and I'd said my business name, and neither of those came out anything right. It kind of put about 5 words in there to make up for what it thought I said.
Right. So funny. Yeah. And so sometimes we'll take, so a couple of our clients do podcasts or vlogs, and they'll have it transcribed by an AI. and then give that to us. And instead of posting the transcription, we will take the thoughts and the ideas from the podcast or from the video and actually turn it into an article, because then they're getting two really unique pieces of content for the price of one, one output, I guess, from the creator. That way they can put it on their blog. They can use it as an email. They can syndicate it lots of different places, but they can also use the video where video's more native, like on YouTube or Instagram stories or things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good way to go with it. So with our podcast, we've stopped, we probably way back before episode 50, I think we stopped doing transcriptions and have gone to basically writing out what we call show notes, which is a blog post hitting the key points. And as you say, we can look at keywords and structure it in a way that it's going to be found by the search engines for that particular thing that we think people are searching for if they want to find that information. But
there's so many layers to it, huh?
Yeah. The other thing I like about what you said is the repurposing. So when you write a blog post, for example, what are some of the things you do to repurpose the content?
That's a great question. So I like to think of content as sort of a hub and spoke model. So whatever the longest or most in-depth piece of content is the hub, and everything else are the spokes, and everything leads back to the hub. The idea being, if I write a long blog post and then I promote it on Facebook, or I put it on Twitter, or I put it on LinkedIn, I want to drive people back to the blog post, because that's where the meat is. And that's usually where the call to action is as well. So, but you can have as many spokes as you and your team can handle, right? So we can repurpose that in a million different ways, even with just a blog. So if you have multiple medias, if you're recording audio, if you're recording video, obviously that's a whole other channel. But even with just a blog post, I can put it on all my social media channels. I could create a little slideshow animation as video with some of the top points. I could record myself reading part of it for a different type of audio, audio channel. I could turn it into a slide deck to share on SlideShare. I could post, syndicate the content to Medium and LinkedIn. It's just a matter of what do you have time for, and what can your team take over for you? Because as the business owner, as the CEO, that's really something you should outsource as quickly as you can, because that's not a great use of your time, just reposting it a bunch of places. We had a coaching client at one point who she was a baby sleep expert. So she would help people get their babies to sleep. And she would produce one 15 to 20 minute video a month. And then her team would turn that into 30 or more unique pieces of micro content. So they'd chop it up and do all kinds of different things with it. And then she only had to show up and produce one thing per month, but she was on every channel. She was showing up regularly. It was great. It worked really well for her.
So there's a tip: have somebody to manage that part of the business for you, and then it's one piece of content a month, one quality piece of content can really generate lots of interest, traffic, and people coming to check you out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been fabulous, Lacy. I'm just aware of the time, and I think it's a good point now to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience, who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions. Hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today as a result.
I hope so.
Yeah. What's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Give yourself space. I think that the biggest misconception about innovation is that it happens like lightning in a bottle, right? But you have to actually give yourself space and time. You have to have dedicated thinking time. If you're always doing, it's hard to innovate. So give yourself space to think.
Yeah. Well, I had to laugh because my last guest, I've gone blank now, Patricia Lowen. Just looking at my notes, Patricia Lowen, who I spoke to yesterday evening late, she said exactly the same thing. She said, give yourself
great minds. Great minds.
So there's a theme coming through in sequenced episodes.
That's good.
All right. And what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I think the best thing I've done is be constantly learning. And that sort of sounds backwards because if I'm consuming content, right, it's
Mm,
not necessarily being innovative. But what I find for myself is that when I take somebody else's course or read a book or watch a webinar, I'm always thinking about how can I make that better? Or I don't agree with that. And that's
mm,
where a lot of my best ideas come from because it's again those gaps. When you can find those gaps that the other person hasn't addressed or for whatever reason, that's where you can be more innovative.
yeah, and being aware of or being kind of attuned to opportunities, I guess,
Hmm.
when you're doing that is important.
What else is happening in your field,
Mm,
in your industry, and also other fields and industries?
yeah.
It's always it's a benefit of what I do. We write for people in all different industries, and so it's always fascinating to see what's coming up in somebody else's industry that's very common over there that's not so common over here, and how can we cross pollinate?
Mm, mm. That's a common theme too. The people looking at other industries totally different to what they're normally in, and seeing whether there are dots that they could join up.
Yeah.
Hmm. All right. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
I mostly use pen and paper, and that I don't know if that's exactly what you meant by that question, but I'm a very tactile learner. I need to write things down, so I have notebooks galore. I journal a lot, and I have to think on paper. So I would say my biggest resource for information is pen and paper.
Yeah, yeah. Do you write or draw?
I write. I'm not much of a drawer.
Okay. All right. Because I think I mean I struggle with stick people, but I
Hmm.
think there is a lot of value to actually getting the visual component down. And then what I like to do with some of the exercises we do, and this is to identify dream clients and what they, what they value, what their problems and issues are, and their dreams and aspirations and those sort of things, and get people to draw something that represents all of those things. And we have a bunch of questions, but then have them explain the drawing to somebody else, to me as the coach, or to somebody they're working with in a group, and record them explaining it, which then kind of could form the written word.
Yeah. I admire people who can think in infographics, if that makes
Mm,
sense. Like the people who think in Venn diagrams or in those sorts of things. I admire that because I often find when I can distill my ideas into something like that, I know it's a winner
mm,
because that means it's clear, it's easy to communicate and things like that.
great. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
Mm, that's such a great question because they do go off the rails, don't they? I think the best way to keep a client on track is to have your own processes really dialed in. Because if you can explain to somebody, we're going to do this first and then that, and then the next thing, and here's why, they're much more likely to comply
Mm,
because they feel taken care of, right? We want guide rails. We don't want to go off, but we don't want to necessarily go off on our own, especially if we're hiring somebody to help us. So I think the best thing I've done is having my own processes dialed in really helps keep the client feeling like we're making forward motion and like we need to stay within these guardrails.
yeah, I really like that, and I particularly like the, explaining why. So here's the next step, and this is why it's
That's
important.
that's a biggie. I've also found that in copywriting that when I explain why I did something or why I chose certain words, people are much more likely to be like, oh, yes, that's a great idea. So if I'm ever like a little hesitant or think the client might not understand why I did something, I will put a comment in it like, here's why I picked this headline or whatever, because it makes them feel so much more confident understanding my reasoning behind it.
Hmm. Great. All right. And what's the number one thing anyone could do to differentiate themselves?
Yeah, I think really it's about right now, it's about quality, right? Because we are bombarded with so much quantity that quality has become a hot commodity. It's difficult to find. So the more you can choose quality in whatever you're doing, but especially your marketing, I
Hmm.
think you'll differentiate yourself just by that merit alone.
Yeah, yeah. And And we talked earlier about standing out, and certainly quality is the key thing there. But and it's amazing. I'm doing some work at the moment on learning management systems, and one of the things, and we're comparing about 10 different systems here for some clients who want to get into that space. And the interesting thing is, I mean, they all offer very similar features. There's, some do one thing better, others do another thing better. And so it really comes down to, in some ways, what's the best fit for your individual needs. But there's one product that is a standout in terms of the service. And that's the service to me, as somebody that's just using a trial account, hasn't paid them any money.
Right.
And so I'm looking at that. They're the standout of the 10. And I'm thinking, well, these other people that aren't even responding, how, and this is the pre-sales where I would have thought they would want to be making the best impression possible. So what happens after I'm locked into and I'm a paid customer?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. And it also, can go back to your values. What are your values as a business? Obviously theirs is customer service, which is important. But your values can really make you stand out as well. Whether that's, a big outward facing value, like we donate 10% of our profits to this charity because we have this value, or if it's just a value like we value efficiency, we value customer service, we value communication, whatever it might be, that's a really great way to stand out as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. Well, thanks, Lacy. This has been really fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you and maybe even get in touch and say thank you and perhaps even get a hold of your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to lacyboggs.com. That's where everything happens. If you're looking for the book, it's on Amazon. It's Make a Killing with Content. It's only 99 cents. You can go take a gander at it. And if you want to get in touch, you can go to lacyboggs.com/book-a-call. And that's a great way to find me. That's where you'll find my calendar. And I'd love to chat and see if we can help you out.
Excellent. And we'll have the links to all of those in the show notes. And at 99 cents, the book is absolutely fantastic value. Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any parting advice for our listener today, Lacy?
I think my best advice would be to go back to what we were talking about earlier and just really understand those 2 whys when it comes to your content marketing. If you, like, as I said, if you can nail those 2 whys for each piece of content you're producing, it will be successful because you'll be hitting those 2 important factors, making sure it's relevant to your audience and moving your business forward.
Great. I love it. Okay. And finally, who else do I need to get on this podcast and why?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I did a little search. I don't think you've spoken to Michelle Mazer, have you?
No, I don't. I haven't.
Her name is Dr. Michelle Mazer. She wrote a book called The 3-Word Rebellion, and she's all about nailing your messaging in 3 words. And I think it's a really fantastic book, and she's a really great guest.
All right. Well,
to have on. She's great.
We'll get an introduction to Michelle from you, and we'll reach out and get her on the show. It sounds like a great topic to explore in more detail.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time and all your insights and sharing so generously with us today, Lacy. I've really enjoyed this. Had a lot of fun, learned a lot about your thinking on content and marketing and leadership marketing. So thanks for all of that and all the best for the future, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me on. It's a great conversation.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and informative conversation with Lacy and took something away from her episode. I really related to Lacy's philosophy of writing content specifically for your dream customer in their language and to solve their challenges. And, of course, the power tip of getting language from the bad reviews is an awesome one too. I'd love to know what you took away from Lacy's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Lacy Boggs. That is LACYBOGGS. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Lacy Boggs. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Lacy there, as well as links to the Content Direction Agency website, her book Make a Killing with Your Content, her social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in today's conversation. If you like this episode, please share it with 2 other people that it might help. Tag me in on that share and I'll reach out to you with a special surprise. Lacy suggested that we have a conversation with Michelle Mazur, author of The 3-Word Rebellion, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Michelle, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Lacy Boggs. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast. We've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including improv coach Jay Suko and author of Paid to Think, David Goldsmith. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.